Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our Sunday broadcast, which is part 2 of Islamic Jihad. And we showed in our broadcast last Sunday that Jihad is a much misunderstood concept, and it is used to project Islam as a violent religion. And this suits non-Muslims for propaganda purposes, that they say Islam is a violent religion and this and that and so on. But unfortunately, it also the same concept is propagated by Muslims themselves. And the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, has written about this. And I read the quotation out last time that Muslims, when they find that both Muslim and non-Muslims are saying that jihad is a violent struggle to force people to embrace Islam, then they think, well, our own scholars are saying this and our opponents are saying this, so this must be correct. But if you look at the Holy Quran, as we saw last time, that jihad is not what people say it is. The Holy Quran's verse says, permission to fight is given to those who are expelled. Permission to fight is given to those who are expelled from their homes without any reason. And the word used there is qital. And in another place, the Holy Quran makes a very good point, and that is that sometimes actually giving in to persecution is worse than actually taking up the sword to prevent that persecution. You see, what we have to remember is that Islam is not a pacifist religion. Our teaching is not, if someone slaps you on one side of your face, that you turn the other face, because all you're doing is encouraging the persecutor. And Islam teaches us to resist persecution. And when giving permission to fight, it says those who are expelled from their homes for no just cause, except that they say there is only one God. And in fact, the Holy Quran says that if God didn't expel one people by another people, all those places of worship where Allah's name is taken, notice the expression, all the places, and it then mentions mosques and synagogues and churches and so on, would have been pulled down. So how can Islam be said to be forcing its teachings on other people? Now you might say, well, this is the theory. Yes, this is not the theory, but this is proven by history. It's theory in so far as it's written in the Holy Quran. Let's look at where the Battle of Badr was fought, which was the first battle between Muslims and non-Muslims. Muslims at that time were in Medina, and the Battle of Badr was fought on the outskirts of Medina. What about Battle of Uhud? That was fought on outskirts of Medina. What about the Battle of the Ditch? The enemy outnumbered Muslims in such great numbers that Muslims resorted to digging a huge ditch around Medina to protect it. if Islam was being forced on people, surely Muslims would have been sending out armies to subjugate people. So why were people coming to destroy Islam, to destroy Medina, to kill Muslims? All the early battles were fought outside Medina. What about after that? Some tribes in Arabia were aligned to the what Muslims called the Roman Empire, which was the Byzantine Empire, and some tribes were allied to the Persians. Now, they complained to their allies about what was happening in what is now Saudi Arabia, and these two mighty powers then ran to Saudi Arabia to destroy Muslims. Muslims didn't attack them. They attacked Muslims. Muslims were far outnumbered. Let me ask you a question, and this is very interesting. When the Muslim state was established 100 years after the death of the Holy Prophet, or or Hijrah, or however you want to take it, what constituted the population of that state? About 70% were Christian. 70% of the world's Christians lived under Muslim rule. Do we have any example of large numbers being slaughtered because they didn't embrace Islam? 70% of world's Muslims lived under Muslims. They had their churches, they worshipped, they had government jobs, they had businesses, and so on. Let me put this to you another way. What was the percentage of Muslims in this empire? Were they 90%, 80%, 70%? Muslims were actually 5% of the population of the whole empire. So, how did it run? It ran on a simple principle. People wrote to Hazrat Umar, the governors and military commanders and so on. They wrote to Hazrat Umar and said, we've conquered city X or Y or Z or whatever. How should we rule it? Hazrat Umar gave a simple instruction. Check whether government servants are doing their duties honestly and diligently, and if they are, leave them alone. If they are not, replace them. Now I ask you, in this instruction, is the word Muslim is mentioned anywhere? The only condition is government servants doing their duty honestly. And if they are, leave them alone. And what does this tell us? That the Islamic State was the first secular state in the world. It didn't say, put Muslims in key positions. And from then until the creation of Pakistan, read Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Quaid-e-Azam's first speech to Pakistan Parliament. Today you are all equal citizens of this state. There will be no discrimination in this state from now on. What is it except enunciating the principles of secularism? That says that state is above any other consideration except except that of loyalty to the state and honesty. This will amaze you because, people, especially Muslims, are forever going on and on about it's only Muslims who should be allowed to govern in Muslim countries and so on and so forth, and all the top jobs must be with the Muslims, etc., etc. But look at Hazrat Umar's example. How did Muslims arrive in Spain? It was a sect of Muslims. In Spain, there were two sects of Muslims. One sect were Unitarian. They were very similar to Muslims. The other sect were Catholic. They believed in Trinity. They believed that Jesus was part of Godhead and so on. Now, the Unitarians approached Muslims. What did they say to Muslims? They said, we have come to you for assistance and help. Why? Because we hear that under your rule, there is no persecution based on religion. In our country, our own co-religionists are persecuting us. Please come and save us. If Islam was being spread by force, why would Christians go and seek assistance from the Muslims? So Muslims went there and they conquered Spain. And they ruled Spain for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And in that Spain, there were Muslims, there were Christians, there were Jews. How come, if Muslims were forcing everyone to embrace Islam, after hundreds of years of rule, there were still Christians and Jews living in Spain? If your statement that Islam is spread by force is correct. And interestingly, when persecution started? When Ferdinand and Isabella conquered Spain. They started to burn Muslims and Jews alive on the cross. That's when persecution started, when Christians took over. And you know who helped? The Muslim Khalifa from Istanbul. He sent his navy when he heard what was going on in Spain. And the navy didn't just rescue Muslims from Spain, it also rescued all those who were being persecuted. And that includes Jews. They were taken back. Some got off in Palestine and started living there. Others went to Turkey. This is why in Turkey there is a large population of Jews. And there are synagogues and so on. Compare that with the Crusaders, who, when they entered Jerusalem after defeating Muslims, it is said that they killed so many people that streets ran with blood. And it was so deep that their horses were buried up to their ankles in that blood. Yet, when Muslims first conquered Jerusalem and when they conquered it again, no blood was shed. In fact, Salahuddin told the Christians who wanted to leave Jerusalem that they were free to go, they will be given protection to leave, and they will be allowed to take as many of their possessions as they can get on horses and camels and so on. How did Muslims arrive in India? Peaceful Muslim cargo ship was attacked and its crew taken prisoners, and Muslims attacked to free those people. This is how Muslims attacked India. But the other interesting thing is, if Muslims are forcing people to embrace Islam, why was it that after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of Muslim rule of different people, there was Khandani Ulama, there was Mughals, there were lots of other people, then despite that, you still had a majority of Hindus. Surely, if the statement that Islam was spread by force is correct, all the Hindus should have been put to the sword. Now, let's look at the first Mughal emperor's last will and testament. He left his last will, and in that he advised his successor that you are ruler of all the people. Do not involve government in religion. Whether someone is, and he specifically says, it's not your problem whether someone is a Shia or is a Sunni, or whether someone is a Hindu or a Muslim. You are everyone's ruler. Deal with everyone justly. This is what Zahiruddin Babur told his successors. And this is why, as I said, after hundreds of years of Muslim rule, Muslims are still in a minority. People who embraced Islam in various places, they embraced Islam because they were impressed by the Muslims' conduct. Someone asked me that when our Jamaat, Ahmadiyya Shahid Islam, or Lahore Ahmadiyya movement started the propagation of Islam in the UK, people were embracing Islam in large numbers at the hands of our Imams. Why is that not happening now? That there are Muslims in tens of thousands in Europe and England and other Western countries. And I replied that you have answered your question in your question. The reason people are not embracing Islam is because there are tens of thousands of Muslims whose character is not such that it would impress anyone, and encourage them to leave their religion for what is to them a foreign religion. But those who came in 1920, well, even before I was going to say 1920, 1911, and people saw their moral fiber, their character, they were impressed. Britain at that time was ruling the world. It was said that the sun never set on the British Empire. And yet a Lahore Ahmadi came and he said, I am going to teach you Islam. And people were surprised. And Muslims told him he was mad. These are people who've conquered us. These are people who rule us. These are people who don't just rule India, but lots of other Islamic countries. And you're going to convert them to Islam. And he said, yes. And it was through his character, through his sacrifice, that people embraced Islam. He didn't have a sword, he didn't have a gun. What was it that the Holy Prophet Muhammad first presented to his people as proof of his prophethood? Did he come down with a military contingent? No. He was alone and he said, I've never lied, have I? They said no. He said, I've never cheated, have I? They said no. I've always been honest, haven't I? And they said, yes, you've always been honest. And that was the moral character that he presented to them, and they saw and they embraced Islam. There was no force involved at that time, and there's never been any force involved in conversion of Islam. Let me ask you, the majority of Indonesians are Muslims. Which army attacked and conquered Indonesia? History tells us no Muslim army went to Indonesia. Majority of people in Malaysia are Muslims. Which Muslim army and conquered Malaysia? None. So how come majority are Muslims? It was peaceful propagation, not even direct propagation, but when people saw the character of the people they were dealing with, they were so impressed that they embraced Islam. And when people can't present an example of what Muslims will behave like, then people are not going to be impressed. They're just going to say, well, everyone beats their own drum. The Buddhists and the Hindus and the Christians and the Catholics and the Jews and the Muslims and so on, they're doing exactly the same thing. There is no moral fiber, there's no moral character. If Islam was spread by force, then because with the advent of Islam, the history started to be written. Before that, history was mostly not written, it was verbal, and it was mostly glorifying whoever the ruler was. But the Holy Quran was written, and then the Hadith was written, and the history started to be written, not only written, but when that was the first instance that people actually checked and criticized instances of history to make sure that they were correct. And compilers of Hadith did this. And I'm saying this because I want to point out to you, written history came into being. So why don't we find in that written history tens of thousands or millions having been massacred by Muslims to get them, to force them to embrace Islam? There may be an odd incident of a massacre and so on. Most such events had some political element behind them. And people talk about Muslims forcing the Jews out of Medina. And that was such a terrible thing to do. Well, I ask you, what have the British done to Shamima Begum? A Bengali girl at the age of 14 or 15 or something, she listened to some extremist broadcast, got brainwashed, went to Turkey and then made her way down and joined, I think, ISIS or someone, and fought against the British. She was a British national. She had a British passport. What did the British government do? They deprived her of her British nationality and expelled her from UK, and she can never come back. 3 of her children have died due to lack of medical attention and medical care. And those children's grandparents are British. And they've tried to get the children into the UK. But the British government says, we don't care. No one points to that. But the Holy Prophet Muhammad does the same thing to the Jews. Because at a dangerous time, at a time when Muslim existence was critically endangered, they supported the Muslims' army, Muslims' enemies' armies. That is all objectionable. But 1500 years later, the British government does the same thing to Shamima Begum, and there's no objection raised. Americans do the same thing to American citizens, and so on. You can mention hundreds of examples. Is that not terrorism? Is that not objectionable? 3 innocent children die through lack of care, and the British government say, we don't care. When the Muslims even sneeze in the direction of a non-Muslim, suddenly all hell breaks loose. Read the history. Read what actually happened. The history of Jerusalem, conquests of Jerusalem, is documented. And we know that when Christians took over Jerusalem, thousands, tens of thousands were slaughtered because they were either Muslims or they were Jews. Now, that's not mentioned anywhere. Jews are not mentioned anywhere. Islam was still spread by force. Hazrat Umar, when he took over Jerusalem, he said, I want to meet the Jews. This is their holy city. And people said, well, there are no Jews. They've been expelled from Jerusalem. Why? They were expelled because they were always causing mischief and creating problems and disruption and violence. So the rulers of Jerusalem expelled them. But Hazrat Umar Razilullah Ta'ala brought them back and said, no, it's their holy city. Bring them back. Let them live in this holy city. Is this an example of spreading Islam by force? Or is this an example of respecting other religions and the places they hold holy and dear, etc.? History of these things is a long one. But the sad thing is this, and I end with this, and Ahad can start. But the sad thing is that Muslims somehow think it's great and glorious to say that Muslims should force others to embrace Islam. Muslims themselves say that. This is the sad thing. If you read Maulana Maududi's Tafhimul Quran, he says, oh, well, for 13 years in Mecca, the Holy Prophet adopted a peaceful character because he was politically weak. He had no choice. What did you expect him to do? Muslims are already being killed. All of them would have been killed. So they had to pretend to be peaceful. But as soon as he got out to Medina, and from under that yoke, and had political power, he took his sword out and said, come on, Quraysh, I'll teach you a lesson. This is Maulana Maududi, a prominent Muslim scholar, telling us that Na'uz Billah, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was just like a worldly politician, waving and weaving and changing his policies to suit whatever political situation confronted him. And that was why God sent the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Although Hazrat Sahib came much before Maulana Maududi, but there were scholars at his time saying exactly and doing exactly the same things. And this is why Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came to put to people the true picture of Islam and say the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought a peaceful religion, but it wasn't peace at any cost. It was a religion that allowed Muslims to defend themselves. So I hand you over to Ahad.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A
Wa
very
alaikum assalam.
a very detailed and nice explanation as well as the context of the current topic which we have today given by Shahid uncle. And yeah, I totally agree with it that you know when their people as the like the simple example you gave of the British that incident, and the simple example like when they are doing that same thing, then the objection is like it's overruled. It's something like okay, let it be. And when something
Mm,
like that, according to the situation, which is the need of the hour, is to be done by some like it was done by our prophet, then the suddenly the judges and maybe like all those uh, Gen Z judges, I would say, that they would come and say, okay, this is something which your prophet did. This is wrong. This is wrong. Okay, well, you are doing the same thing. Then where's the justice there? Do it there. But they are trying to just like ignore the stuff which they do, and like trying to mislead, misinterpret the things which happened in our history. But
yeah.
yeah, anyways, I would love to throw some more light on this topic, and for that I have prepared a brief presentation which I would love to share. Please let me know if it is visible now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Well, I welcome you all to our channel, Islamic Institute of Lahore Ahmadiyya Movement, and we'll be continuing with our Jihad in Islam series. In the last episode, we discussed what is the correct meaning of jihad from the Holy Quran and Hadith. So, in today's video, we'll be discussing one of the most frequently asked questions: that was Islam spread by force? Is this the actual thing which happened? So, join us as we debunk all the myths, remove all the misconceptions, and uncover the actual peaceful essence of jihad in Islam, rooted in self development, compassion, and justice for all. So, without further ado, let's get started. And so, a brief recap of part one. In that part one, we had four chapters: significance of jihad, use of the word jihad in Quranic verses, use of word jihad in hadith, and use of word jihad by jurors. If you haven't seen our episode, you can you have the link given in like description of our playlist. You can check it there. I would surely recommend everyone to watch that first and then continue from here this part. So in
Mm,
today's a discussion, I would love to throw some more light on this particular question, which is often misinterpreted, and you know people often misinterpret the facts, and they ask this that okay, Islam was spread by force, and something like that. So in this episode we'll be discussing all these things in detail. We'll be removing the misconception on spread of Islam by force. We'll be discussing the circumstances under which war was permitted. I'll also refute the misinterpreted so-called verse of the sword, and we'll also discuss what Islam says that when we shall cease the war. And also we'll get to know, and we'll also explore that Islam, Quran recommends peace. Okay, so there are other topics upcoming in the upcoming parts we'll be discussing deeply, analyzing the hadith on war under jihad, and the final part would be the directions relating to war, in which we'll also discuss that how Islam abolished slavery. And Some other topics which are also part of this series, like jihad does not mean only war, its correct meaning proof from the Quran and Hadith, no punishment for apostasy proof from Quran and Hadith, and are Muslims commanded to force non-Muslims to accept Islam. All of these are already addressed in our previous Sunday broadcast episodes. You can easily check them out in the bio, like in the link, like the description box. I'll provide the links to those. And let's get started to the part 1, that is removing the misconception of was Islam spread by force. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so let me just quickly pick out my pen. Okay, the propagation of Islam, no doubt, is a religious duty of every true Muslim who must follow the example of Prophet. But the spread of Islam by force is a thing which have no trace which can be found in the Quran. Very important. No trace of such a statement that spread of Islam by force is there in the Holy Quran. On the other hand, the Holy Book lays down the opposite doctrine in clear words. La ikra fid deen. There is no compulsion in religion. And the reason is added. The right way is clearly distinct from the error. This is the Holy Quran, chapter number 2, verse number 256. So, this verse was revealed after the permission for war had been given. And it is therefore certain that the permission to fight has no connection with the preaching of religion. Very important. Must note this. So, just a minute. Okay. That the Quran never taught such a doctrine, nor did Prophet ever think of it, is a fact which is now being gradually appreciated by the Western mind. After beginning his article on jihad with the statement that the spread of Islam by arms is a religious duty upon Muslims in general, D.B. MacDonald, the writer of the article in Encyclopedia of Islam, in a way questions the correctness of his own allegation by adding that there is nothing in the Quran. Very important. He himself writes this. There is nothing in the Quran to corroborate it, and that the idea was not present even to the mind of the Prophet. Now we'll read what he says. He writes in his book. You can check I've given the link as well here, as well as the original cutting. I'll read it from here only. This is Encyclopedia of Islam, volume number 2, page number 1042 of the book. Under the title Jihad, it's starting from D here, so please be aware if you open this book. So the spread of what he writes is this: the spread of Islam by arms is a religious duty upon Muslims in general. The main thing which he writes is that in the Meccan surahs of Quran, patience under attack is taught. No other attitude was possible. But at Medina, the right to repel attack appears, and gradually it became a prescribed duty to fight against the subdue hostile Meccans. Very important. Whether Muhammad himself recognized that his position implied steady and unprovoked war against the unbelieving world until it was subdued to Islam may be in doubt. Very important. The traditions are explicit on this point, but the Quranic passages speak always of the unbelievers who are subdued as dangerous or faithless. Okay, so this was something which he has written in his own book. Okay, so here is a clear confession that the Quran does not enjoin the waging of war against all the unbelievers so as to subdue them to Islam, nor was the idea present to the mind of the Prophet. The logical consequence of this confession is that genuine traditions cannot inculcate such a doctrine. For tradition, Hadith reports the saying of the Prophet, and if the Quran and the Prophet never taught such a doctrine, how could it be said to be the religious duty of Muslims? There is obviously a struggle here in the writer's mind between the preconceived ideas and the actual knowledge of facts. So let's move ahead to our chapter number 2, which is the circumstances under which war was permitted. The refuting the misinterpreted Quranic verses. Very important section. It is a misstatement of facts to say that patience under attack was taught at Makkah. because there was no other alternative, and that the right to repel attack came at Medina. Very important. This is something which we don't agree with. Why? I'll tell you that. The attitude was no doubt changed, but that change was due to the change of circumstances. At Makkah, there was individual persecution and patience was taught. If the conditions had remained same at Medina, the Muslim attitude would have been the same. But the individual persecution could no more be resorted to by the Quraysh of Makkah, as the Muslims were living out of their reach. This very circumstance fanned the fire of their wrath, and they now planned the extinction of Muslims as a nation. Very important. The sword was taken up to annihilate the Muslim community or to compel it to return to unbelief. Very important. This was being done by the unbelievers or the non-Muslims. The sword was taken up by them to annihilate the Muslim community or to compel it to return to unbelief. That was the challenge thrown at them, and the Prophet had to meet it. The Quran bears the clear testimony to it. The earliest permission to repel attack is conveyed in the words which show that the enemy had already taken up the sword or decided to do so. How I say this? Let me quote the Quranic verse as well. So this is chapter number 22, verse number 39 and 40. What is written? Let's read. The permission to fight is given to those on whom war is made, because they are oppressed. Point number 1. And surely Allah is able to assist them. Okay, so next verse we read, those who are driven from their homes without a just cause, except that they say our Lord is Allah, and if Allah did not repel some people by others, cloisters and churches and synagogues and mosques in which Allah's name is much remembered would have been pulled down. And surely Allah will help him who helps his cause. Very important. So please note the following points which I am about to make. Okay, so the very words of this verse show that it is the earliest on the subject of fighting, as it speaks of the permission being given now, which evidently had not been given up to this time. The permission was given to a people upon whom war was made by their enemies. The word which has been used in this particular ayah or this particular verse, chapter number 22, verse number 39, is yukatiluna. Okay, and it was not a permission to make war with people in general, but only with the people who made war on them. Very important. The reason is stated plainly, that because they are oppressed and those who have been expelled from their homes without a just cause. So it was clearly an aggressive war on the part of the enemies of Islam. So who thus sought to exterminate the Muslims or to compel them to forsake their religion. So Quran says another verse, that is that, and they will not cease fighting you until they turn you back from your religion, if they can. So this is Surah Baqarah, which is chapter number 2, verse number 217. So it says that it was a holy war in the truest sense, because as stated further on, that if war had not been allowed under these circumstances, there would have been no peace on earth, no religious liberty, and all houses for the worship of God would have been destroyed. This was quoted in this particular verse, chapter number 2, verse number 40, that our Lord is Allah, and if Allah did not repel some people by others, cloisters, churches and synagogues and mosques in which Allah's name is much remembered would have been pulled down. All of the places of worships are mentioned here. Okay, so you need to understand the points which I am making, that indeed there could have been no war holier than the one which was needed, as much for the religious liberty of the Muslims as for the principle of religious liberty itself, as much to save mosques and as much to save cloisters, synagogues and churches. Okay, if there had been a just a cause for war in this world, it was for the war that had been permitted to the Muslims. And undoubtedly, war with such pure motives was a jihad, a struggle carried on simply with the object that truth may prosper and that freedom of conscience may be maintained. Okay, so the second verse giving to the Muslim permission to fight runs as follows. What is the verse? Chapter number 2, verse number 190, which says, "And fight in the way of Allah against those who fight against you, and be not aggressive." Very important. And be not aggressive. Surely Allah loves not the aggressors. Okay. So from this verse, please note some important points. That here again the condition is plainly laid down that the Muslims shall not be the first to attack. Very important. The Muslims shall not be the first to attack, and they had the duty to fight it, which like they had to fight it had now become a duty, but only against those who fought against them. Very important. Aggression was expressly prohibited, as you have seen here. It is mentioned in this verse, "Be not aggressive. Surely Allah loves not the aggressors." Chapter number 2, verse number 190. And this fighting in self-defense is called fighting in the way of Allah, or fi sabilillah, because fighting in defense is the noblest and justest of all causes. It was the divine it it was the cause divine, because if the Muslims had not fought, they would have been swept out of existence. Obviously, we have mentioned the reasons above, and there would have been none to establish the divine unity on earth. And very important things which we must also notice, that these were the very words in which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed in the field of Badr. That is, "O Allah, I beseech thee to fulfill thy covenant and thy promise. O Allah, if you will otherwise, you will not be worshipped anymore." So this is in this particular hadith which is being quoted here, Sahih Bukhari 21915, book number 6, hadith number 128. Link of this particular hadith will be given in description. You can check it from there, those who have to cross verify. And the words fi sabilillah are misinterpreted by most European writers as the meaning the propagation of Islam, which is not the correct word. Nothing could be farther from truth. The Muslims were not fighting to force Islam on others. Rather, they were being fought to force them to renounce. Rather, they were being fought to force them to renounce Islam, as shown in the verse quoted above. The Muslims were being forced that they should renounce Islam, and they were, oppressed by others. So that is already being quoted above. What a travesty of facts to say that war was undertaken by Muslims for the propagation of Islam. Now, please listen very carefully. The following points which I am trying to refute. These are some common verses from chapter number 9, which is Surah At-Tawbah of the Holy Quran. Some refutations, some correct interpretations of those verses which people often misinterpret, especially whenever they are discussing the topics like jihad. So let's delve into them deeply. Okay. So it is sometimes asserted that these injunctions related to defensive fighting were abrogated by a later revelation in chapter 9 At-Tawbah. Okay. Yet anyone who reads that chapter cannot fail to note that it does not make the slightest change in the principles laid down in the earlier verses. Fighting with idolaters is enjoined in the 9th chapter, but not with all of them. Very important. Let's see who. In the very first verse of the chapter 9 of the Holy Quran, the declaration of immunity is directed towards only those of the idolaters with whom you made an agreement. Not all the idolaters, and even in their case, an exception is made. Let's check the verse. That is chapter number 9, verse number 4. What does it say? "Except those of the idolaters with whom you made an agreement. Then they have not failed you in anything, and have not backed up anyone against you. So fulfill their agreement to the end of their terms, for Allah loves those who keep their duty." Very important. So this shows that there were some idolatrous tribes on friendly terms with Muslims, and the Muslims were not allowed to fight with them. Very important. And it was only the hostile tribes who broke their agreements and attacked the Muslims that were to be fought against. Even the individual idolaters, even if belonging to hostile tribes, could still have safety. Very important. If they wanted to inquire about Islam and were given a safe conduct back home, even if they did not accept Islam. Now, this is not me saying it, we have another Quran verse which approves this. Where? Chapter number 9, verse number 6. And if any of the idolaters seek protection by thee, protect him till he hears the word of Allah, and convey him to his place of safety. Very important. This is because they are a people who know not. Okay. The idolater who stood in the need of protection evidently belonged to a hostile tribe, because the friendly tribes, being in alliance with the Muslims, had no need of seeking protection, which is obvious because of the Muslim government. Thus, even a hostile idolater was sent back safely to his own tribe and not molested in any way, as the other words of the verse show. As I already read, that even if any of the idolaters seek protection by thee, protect him till he hears the word of Allah, and convey him to his place of safety. This is because they are a people who know not. Chapter number 9, verse number 6. Very important. So the idolaters with whom fighting was enjoined were those who had violated the treaties and were foremost in attacking Muslims, as the words of the Quran show. Chapter number 9, verse number 8. If they prevail against you, they respect neither ties of relationship nor of covenant in your case. Okay. And another verse, chapter number 9, verse number 13. Will you fight not a people who broke their oaths and aimed at the expulsion of the messenger, and they attacked you first? Very important. So what we understand from these verses, that chapter 9, which is supposed to abrogate the earlier verses, still speaks of fighting only against these idolaters who attacked you first, which we just learned from this particular verse, chapter number 9, verse number 13. And this is the very condition which was laid down in earlier verses, which we read above, chapter number 2, verse number 190. Okay. So this was the particular chapter in which we read about that what were the correct circumstances under which the war was permitted for Muslims. And in this we also refuted the often misinterpreted verses of the Holy Quran. Okay. Now comes another chapter which is very important, because there is one particular verse in the Holy Quran, in chapter 9, At-Tawbah, which is often does not notwithstanding with it, as we already just now learned from this particular discussion which we had just now, and the chapter 9 as shown above does not go beyond what is contained in the earliest revelations on the subject of war. As I mentioned, we saw in Surah like Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse number 190, that the commandments which were given in that particular verse, which is the earliest of the commandments, this particular chapter, which is often referred that it is maybe like abrogated and stuff, it does not have even the slightest of change on the it does not go beyond what is contained in the earliest revelations on the subject of war. The 5th verse of that chapter, chapter number 9, verse number 5, is often called by some people as the verse of the sword. Okay, as if it articulated and indiscriminate massacre of all idolaters or unbelievers. The misconception is due to the fact that words are taken out of context and a significance is forced on them which the context cannot bear. Now let's have a look that what does this particular verse say. The following words occur in the 5th verse, that chapter number 9, verse number 5 says, so when the sacred months have passed away, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Okay, but please note that similar words also occur in the earliest revelation on the subject, and kill them wherever you find them. Chapter number 2, verse number 191. So these are the words which you find here as well, and these are the words which you find here as well. Here. So similar words you find in both these, verses. If you compare these both verses, so similar words occur in the earliest revelation on this same subject. Okay. Now let's take both one by one. Okay. So in both places, it is the context which makes it clear as to the identity of the persons regarding whom this particular order is given. Okay, in both cases, those against whom the order is given are the people who have taken up the sword and attacked the Muslims first. Very important. The people who have taken up the sword and attacked the Muslims first. It has already been shown that the injunction to fight against the idolaters, as contained in the opening verses of chapter number 9, relates only to such idolatrous tribes as those who had made agreements with Muslims and then broken them and had attacked the Muslims, not to all idolatrous people wherever they may be found in the world. Okay, if only we read the verse that precedes this particular verse, which is often like mentioned to people by as the the verse of the sword. If we read the first or the verse which precedes it, or the chapter number 9 verse number 4, what we find, the not the shadow of doubt will remain that all idolaters are not spoken of here. Okay, for the fourth verse as quoted already, it states that let's quickly refer to the fourth verse as well, that except those of the idolaters with whom you had made an agreement, then they have not failed you in anything and have not backed you up against anything against you. Fulfill their agreement to end of their terms, for Allah loves those who keep their duty. Okay, so what does this mean? That those idolaters were not within the purview of the order who had remained faithful to their agreements. The order was therefore dictated against specified adulterous tribes, the tribes that had made agreements with Muslims and broken them repeatedly. Very important. As mentioned explicitly in the verse 8, chapter number 8, verse number 56. So it is a mistake to regard the order as including all idolatrous people living anywhere in the world or even in Arabia. And if the verse preceding the so-called verse of the sword makes a clear exception in case of all friendly idolatrous tribes, that following it immediately makes clear exception in favor of such members of the idolatrous hostile tribes as ask the protection of the Muslims, as stated in chapter number 9 verse number 6. This is the particular verse which we are talking about. Okay, so what we want to what my points are on this particular subject, that when we continue the subject, it is further laid down that the order relates only to the people who broke their oaths and aimed at expulsion of the prophet, and they attacked you first, chapter number 9 verse number 13. With such a clear explanation of the fifth verse contained in the preceding and the following verses, no sane person would interpret it as the meaning which says that the killing of all idolaters or carrying on of unprovoked war against all the idolatrous tribes. So this is the correct interpretation of this particular verse, and this clearly means that the meaning which people interpret out of this verse, that it means to kill all the people, this is wrong, totally wrong. Now let's move on to our next chapter, which is when shall war cease as per the Quran. Okay, now it is thus clear that Muslims were allowed to fight only in self-defense, okay, to preserve their national existence, and they were forbidden to be aggressive. The Quran nowhere gives them this permission to enter on an unprovoked war against the whole world. The conditions were also laid out as to when war should cease, where it is mentioned, chapter number 9 verse number 1, chapter number 2 verse number 193, and fight with them until there is no persecution, and the religion should be only for Allah, and if they desist, then there should be no hostility except against the oppressors. Now very important verse, let's break it down easily. The words religion should be only for Allah are sometimes misinterpreted as meaning that all people should accept Islam. People often misinterpret this verse and they say that this means that all people should accept Islam, a significance utterly opposed to the very next word of the same verse, of this particular verse itself, that but if they desist, there should be no hostility against the oppressor. This is in the particular verse itself. that if they desist, there should be no hostility against the oppressor. The desisting plainly refers to the desisting from persecution. Similarly, the words occur in early Medina revelation as well. Chapter number 8, verse number 39 says that, and fight with them until there is no more persecution, and all religions are for Allah. But if they desist, then surely Allah sees what they do. So when we compare both expressions, religion should only be for Allah, and all religions are for Allah, carry one and same significance, that religion is treated as a matter between man and his God, a matter of conscience, and in which nobody has the right to interfere. This is the main significance of these two statements which are made in the particular verses. And it may uh, it may be added that if the words had the meaning which it is sought to be, then the prophet would have been the first man to translate that teaching into practice, while as a matter of fact he made peace with the enemy on numerous occasions and stopped fighting with idolatrous tribes when they wanted peace. Very important. Even when he subjugated a people, he gave them full liberty in their religion, as it happened in the conquest of Mecca. Okay, and by this we conclude this chapter, and let's move on to our final chapter, that is peace recommended by Islam. It is thus clear that Muslims were allowed to fight only in self defense to preserve their national existence, and they were forbidden to be aggressive. Quran nowhere gives them the permission to enter on unprovoked war against the whole world. Okay, as we have already seen these verses, that chapter number 8, verse number 61-62, it mentions that if they had inclined to peace, incline thou also to it, and trust in Allah. Surely He is the hearer, the knower. And if they intend to deceive thee, then surely Allah is sufficient for thee. Okay, so please note that it should be noted that peace here is recommended, even though the enemy's sincerity may be doubtful. Very important. It is mentioned in this particular verse. You can check it for yourself, all those who would like to cross check. Chapter number 8, verse number 61 and 62. It is clearly written that if they incline to peace, you also incline to it, and trust in Allah. Surely Allah is the hearer, the knower. And it is also mentioned in the next verse itself that even if they intend to deceive you, then surely Allah is sufficient for you. Okay, so what I mean to say here is that even though the enemy's intentions and sincerity may be doubtful, peace is recommended. And there were reasons to doubt the good intentions of the enemy of Arab tribes, as the Arab tribes did not attach much value to their treaty agreements, as we see in the history as well. Another verse also proves of this, that chapter number 8, verse number 56 says that those with whom you make an agreement, then they break their agreement every time, and they keep not their duty. So none could carry those precepts into practice better than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was so prone to make peace whenever the enemy showed the least desire toward it, that even on the occasion of Hudaybiyah truce, he did not hesitate to accept the position of the defeated party. Okay, though he had never been defeated on the battlefield, and his companions had sworn to lay down their lives one and all if the worst had to come to the worst. Okay, yet let's, like, the main point which I need to make here is that he was never defeated on the battlefield. Even then he did not hesitate to accept the position of the defeated party. He wanted to propose a peace treaty, something like that. Okay, he made peace and accepted the terms which his own followers looked upon as humiliating for Islam. He accepted the condition that he would go back without performing a pilgrimage, and also that if a resident of Mecca embraced Islam and came to him for protection, he would not give him protection. Thus, the injunction contained in the Quran to make peace with the idolaters, if they desired peace, combined with the practice of the Prophet in concluding peace on any terms, is a clear proof that the theory of preaching Islam by sword is a pure myth. so far as the Quran is concerned. Okay, and I would like to conclude my today's discussion. And to sum up, neither in the earlier revelations nor in the later is there the slightest indication of any injunction to propagate Islam by sword. On the other hand, war was clearly allowed as a defensive measure up to the last. It was to be continued only so long as religious persecution lasted, and when that ceased, war was to cease by the fact itself. And there was additional condition that if a tribe against whom the Muslims were fighting, because of its aggressive and repeated violation of treaties, if those embraced Islam, it then and there became the part of the Muslim body politic, and its subjugation by arms was therefore foregone, and war with it came to an end. Such remained the practice of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during his lifetime, and there is not a single instance in history in which he offered the alternative of the sword or Islam to any tribe or individual, nor did he even lead an aggressive attack. The last of his expeditions was that of the Ta'abuk, in which he led an army of 30,000 against the Roman Empire. But when he found, on reaching the frontier, after a very long and tedious journey, that the Romans did not contemplate an offensive, he returned without attacking them. Very important. His action on this occasion also throw light on the fact that the permission to fight against Christians contained in the chapter number 9 verse number 29 was also subject to the condition laid down in chapter number 2 verse number 190, that the Muslims should not be aggressive in war. So by this I conclude my discussion, and as I mentioned, in the upcoming parts we would love to discuss in detail, since this series is particularly dealing everything in detail. So we'll be discussing all the things which revolve around the hadiths on war under jihad, and then we'll be discussing the directions relating to war and how Islam abolished slavery. And as I already mentioned, we have already discussed some topics which are also part of the series, that jihad does not mean only war. Its meaning proved from Quran and Hadith. No punishment for apostasy proved from Quran and Hadith. Are Muslims commanded to force non-Muslims to accept Islam? All these topics are also part of this series, but they are already been mentioned and already been discussed in detail in our previous episodes. So I would love to recommend this to you, that please check out those episodes as well, so that you can get the complete context and you can understand it deeply, that Islam does not allow converting people, or like forcing people to accept Islam by force. And by jihad, it does not mean to kill anyone who is who is a non-Muslim. We have proved that as well in the verses which I quoted above. And final point which we explained and which we concluded from our discussions, that jihad was only allowed war was only allowed for a particular reason, and that was self-defense for Muslims have never done something which is in attack, or they have never been aggressive towards something. They were always in defense of the oppression which was done on them. And that's what Islam, Quran and Hadith teaches us about jihad, war, and everything which is related to this particular topic. We also refuted the misinterpretations which are given by non-Muslims to misinterpret the meaning of jihad. I hope our small discussion which we had today helps you to better understand and clarify all those doubts which you had in mind regarding this particular topic. So by this I conclude my discussion. Jazakallah khair.
I apologize to our listeners. We said this will be 1 hour, and it's already 1 hour and 10 minutes. So I apologize for that. We'll try and keep our broadcasts to 1 hour. In fact, even 1 hour is too long. We should try and make them much shorter. But I just want to make two quick points. Number one, if it was a Muslim's duty to force people to embrace Islam, then Quran wouldn't say that it's the Muslims' duty to protect synagogues and churches and all other places of worship. Number one. The second point I want to make is that Muslims should realize how dangerous the theory of abrogation is, because that can be used to uh, justify anything. Oh, that verse says, don't drink. Oh, it's been abrogated by something else. You can use this theory to undermine the whole doctrine of Islam. The question arises, didn't God know what he was revealing, what guidance he was revealing, if he then, a few months later, had to go and abrogate it? So this belief that non-Ahmadi Muslims have, that parts of the Holy Quran are abrogated, or some verses, their order remains, but their recitation has been abrogated, and they're not in the Holy Quran. All these theories were conclusively refuted by Hazrat Maulana Muhammad Ali Sahib, and shown that these were political theories, simply to justify un-Islamic things that Muslim leaders, kings wanted to do, and the scholars were under pressure to justify their un-Islamic deeds. Um, Apologies again for the length of the lecture, and um, uh, I hope you found it useful nevertheless. And until we meet again, I take my leave of you with the prayer that whoever you are and wherever you may be, may Allah keep the whole of humanity safe and sound, and free from harm, regardless of people's religion or sect or caste or creed or color. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.